Okay, good morning everyone. Today is 23 August, the year 2006. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress, in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with fellow volunteer Milt Ray, and today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Dr. Danuta Batorska. Dr. Batorska was a girl growing up in Nazi and Soviet-occupied Poland during World War II. So we're going to talk to her about that and a lot of other things. Nice to have you here, Doctor.
Thank you.
Now, would you please spell your full name for us, please?
My full name, Danuta, D-A-N-U-T-A, Stefania, S-T-E-F-A-N-I-A, Batorska, B-A-T-O-R-S-K-A.
Okay, and when and where were you born?
I was born in Hajnówka, Poland, on May 31, 1935.
And how do you spell that?
Hajnówka,
Mhm.
H-A-J-N-O-W-K-A.
And where is that in relationship to Warsaw, for instance?
It's Eastern Poland. It's actually a town which was a part of the National Park and Preserve in Poland. And it is still in existence, both the park and the town.
Can you give us a little background? Most Americans, I don't think, including myself, know exactly how Poland came into existence and sort of the history of it, how far back it went, and the...
Well, Poland came into existence some time ago.
I know.
The baptism of Poland took place in 966 through the marriage of the Polish ruler to a Czech princess. We did not want to take Christianity from Germans who were our enemies all the time. Russia did not exist yet. And so Poland begins officially, so to speak, or historical records from 966. But before that, we already had other dynasties, other rulers, but not historically recorded.
And they were not Christian, the previous
No,
ones?
the country became Christian 966.
Okay. And how did that come about?
Through the marriage
of the
ruler, Mieszko the first.
And so he said, we're going to be
Dobrówka.
Christian, and so everybody became Christian, more or less.
More or less, yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. Okay, well then let's kind of trace it on up to, because I know it's been broken apart and that sort of thing over the years.
Okay. Now, Poland was a major power in Europe, especially during the Golden Age. Poland actually was the largest as far as territory in 16th century. And we constantly were at war with Turks, the Islamic people, because they always wanted to conquer all of Europe, and Poland was an obstacle. So Poland actually was instrumental in allowing Christianity to be preserved. One of the great victories of Poland by King John III Sobieski took place at Vienna. Vienna was sieged by the Turks, and King Sobieski came to the aid of Vienna, relieved the siege, and so actually saved all of Western Europe.
About what year was
that? Was towards the end of 17th century. Poland was still a major power. And then Poland made a big mistake in that the dynasties of the kings ended, and the nobility decided to have an election of the king. And of course, everybody in Europe wanted to become a Polish king, and votes could be purchased and such. There was quite a bit of, let's say, corruption going on. And Poland was weakened through the process, and then towards the end of 18th century, Poland was divided between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. until World War I, when Poland regained its independence.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for that. And your father, what was his name?
Stanisław. Stanisław. Batorski. His name ends in I because that's the male ending. Mine is A because I'm a woman. We have gender differentiation in Poland's names and so on.
Yeah, kind of like Latin. I remember when I took that.
Yeah, Polish grammar is actually based on Latin.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have only 7 declensions of nouns.
And what did your father do?
He was an administrator at the National Park and Forest. He had a master's degree from the Polytechnic in Lwów, which was really a very well-known institute in Europe. And he had a master's in forestry.
That national preserve, how large was that?
That was quite large, and originally it was the hunting grounds of the Polish kings. So it was preserved really as a primeval forest. It is still a primeval forest. If you want to find a primeval forest in Europe, you go there. And not too long ago, about 10 years ago, BBC made a special on it, 1-hour special. And you will find there the wood bisons, which you also have in Alaska and northern United States, and they were extinct actually in Europe until they were raised in Poland.
And so a lot of deer and those bison
Oh,
and all
animals,
kinds
yeah,
of stuff.
animals, and you live. The problem is that after World War II, when part of Poland was given away, the National Park and Preserve was actually divided into 2 sections, and one section went into what is Belarus today, and I have no idea what they are doing, if they are trying to preserve it. Probably not.
Okay. And your mother, what was her name?
Janina, Janina.
And what was her maiden name?
Kucharska, Kucharska.
Okay, and let's go back to your dad. His ancestry, can you trace back, or do you know his ancestry, his parents and grandparents and stuff?
I don't know about the grandparents, but I do know about his, excuse me, I'll
That's okay.
pick this up.
Sure.
I know about his parents. They were in the city of Lwów, Lwow, both my parents. The city of Lwów again was given away, taken from Poland, and now is in Ukraine, and it is called Lviv, Lviv. And so my paternal grandfather, by the name of Francis Batorski, he was a police commissioner in Lwów and a high official of Dwójka. Dwójka would have been comparable to FBI. So that was his background. By education, he was an attorney, but he didn't practice law. Now, my grandmother, Stefania Batorska, she was just what you would call in the United States a housewife, a mother, you know. Do you want to know about my maternal grandparents?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Both of them were educators. And I don't know about the great-grand whoever, you know. I don't know about that.
But as far as you know, far back as you can remember, or I mean that you think they were all lived in Poland. I mean, they didn't
definitely.
come from,
No, definitely. Well, I don't know. You know, there was a tremendous amount of mixture in Poland.
Right.
And I know that one of my great or great-grandmothers, whatever, she was German, for instance. I have no idea what other blood I carry in me, you know, because Poland was mixed. And you must remember that we were constantly at war with Turks, Tartars, and such, so I may have other blood too.
Tell me a little bit about the music.
Music?
Poland. The music from Poland.
I'm
Famous
not-
composers.
Oh, well, of course, Frederick Chopin is the one who is very
I'm just
well
going
known.
to say, because I was just watching his biography last night. It was a movie about him.
With George Sand, I suppose, you know.
Yeah.
Well, he was a great patriot, and, you know, of course, he had to leave Poland because he was against the occupation of Poland, so he had to leave it. But he remained Polish in his spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like Chopin's music.
Beautiful,
Yeah,
isn't
it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And many movies that you watch, it'll be in the background, you know, of setting the mood and things like that. Yeah.
But you know, most Polish composers were great patriots. For instance, Moniuszko, he wrote Polish operas, which of course are not heard in the United States, and I don't know why. But he was very patriotic because the subjects of his operas are always Polish, the Polish spirit, Polish history. And that was from the period when Poland was still occupied and just regaining its freedom, and you had to actually teach people about Polish history, Polish heritage, and such. And same thing applies to literature.
Was your family very religious?
What do you mean by very
Well,
religious?
did you go to church?
Oh yes, we went to church, but I don't know what you mean by very
Well,
religious.
Here in America, if you go to church, you're considered pretty religious. So that's
We were Catholic. Practically everybody in Poland was Catholic or
Right.
is Catholic. Yes, we were practicing Catholics.
And is that like Western Catholicism as opposed to Eastern?
Latin.
The Latin, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Roman Catholic.
Roman,
Yeah.
Roman.
Yeah. Well, I am too, so I know that.
Yeah, Roman. No, we took. Keep in mind that Poland took Christianity from Czechs, and Czechs were Roman Catholics. So our religion is going to be Roman Catholic, and not Ukrainian Catholic, which would be part of the. Poland had part of Ukraine under its dominion.
The Russian
you know,
Orthodox
yeah,
or something.
Or exactly.
Yeah.
Not Russian Orthodox,
Greek.
because the Ukrainian Catholics recognize the Pope.
Oh, they do?
Yeah,
Oh,
they do.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Except the rite is going to be Byzantine. Yeah.
Okay, did you have any brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. Her first name is Krystyna, Krystyna, middle name Barbara, but now she uses only Barbara. She lives in Mexico City. She's married. She's a painter.
Oh, and is she, what age, is she older or younger than you?
She's older by about 2.5 years.
So, well, you probably can't remember yourself, but maybe your parents related what they were doing or on September 1, 1939.
I don't think we were doing anything special, just normal life. And then the planes came, bombardment of Poland, the Blitzkrieg, as you know, and the Nazi planes not simply came into western section of Poland, but they also would fly into our section, which was eastern Poland. And just for the sport of it, they would shoot the cattle and at people as well. So it was really quite a terrifying experience. And then when Warsaw fell, the Polish government actually ran towards Romania, and same with many of the military people. And to go to Romania, they had to come through our place. And so we were constantly besieged by members of the Polish government, by members of the military who were on their way towards Romania. It was a very difficult time.
Did you live on the preserve?
Not preserve itself, outside. There was a government house and government office and so on, so we were outside but very close to it.
Was it a town like that you lived in?
No,
or
it was
out in the
very
country
close
kind
to
of?
a village. No, because you had to have administrators close to the preserve, so you couldn't put them all in a town. You had to put them wherever you needed them. So it was next to a village, which was actually not Polish, but Belarusian, because we had a mixture of people, Belarusians, Ukrainians, Polish, people of German extraction, you name it.
Again, you were too young to know, but I'm sure your parents talked about it and stuff. Were all the things that Hitler had been doing up to that point, were your parents apprehensive that this was going to happen, that the Nazis were going to come in?
I don't think anybody in Poland expected it. I think it took everybody by surprise. Although afterwards, when you looked at all the events, at Polish diplomats, ambassadors, and so on, you realized that there was something going on that shouldn't have been going on.
I want to go back to World War I, and I'm not clear on that, how Poland fit in with World War I. Whose side were they on? How that all? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Polish army was formed, and under Marshal Józef Piłsudski, who is a great Polish hero, Poland regained its independence.
Okay. When World War I started, it was it divided more or less in three. Did you say
Into three sections, exactly.
By who controlled each one?
Austria, Prussia. Prussia became by then Germany, and Russia.
Okay.
And so General Piłsudski formed the Polish army, came and fought the battles to regain Poland's independence.
During World War I or after
World War I.
During World. Okay.
In fact, we did not have any help. The only help that we received was by Polish volunteers, Polish American volunteers who came to help Poland. But as far as help from Europe, none. In fact, after World War I ended, when Poland claimed its independence, this was very much disputed at the Treaty of Versailles. You don't give a monkey a watch. That was the common saying.
The what?
You don't give a monkey a watch.
Oh.
Poland was a monkey. So there was a tremendous amount of antagonism, yes. And the Battle of Vistula, when it would have been Soviet army by then, in World War I, when they encroached and were next to Warsaw, and nobody came to help Poland. Poland won major victory, and the Soviets had to go back. But nobody helped us.
Okay, let's go back to then the first part of World War II. Everybody's leaving. I mean, the government officials are kind of coming through your area to get out.
But they have to.
Yes. And so, what did your father do then?
My father actually escaped. He was trying to escape because he would have been immediately taken, had the, let's say, Nazi come over, he would have been taken by him. Had the Soviets come in, he would have been taken by them. So he actually ran away, and he found himself in the city of Krakow in Poland, except that family members told him, go back, you can't leave your wife and children alone. He came back, and of course he was immediately imprisoned by the Soviets. And his father, and
let's again, we talked about this earlier. To me, I didn't understand that the Soviets came in about the same time the Nazis came in, because they had that pact between themselves.
They had a pact to divide Poland, right?
And they had decided among themselves how they were going to.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then they came in, and what did they do with your dad then?
Well, before they came in, it was really quite bad because the Belarusian peasants were very much anti-Polish, and they took my father, imprisoned him in the village. They actually made him dig a grave for himself and started shooting at him until he actually collapsed into the grave. And when the Soviets came, they, in a sense, liberated my father from the peasants, because these would have simply killed him.
These were peasants that lived in the area?
In the area, in the village next to us.
And
they wanted to set the house on fire, but it was too close to the village, so they decided no, it wasn't worth it. And
so they had Russian sympathies living in that area?
Well, they hated both Russians and Polish people. They hated everybody. And the people who worked in the park, the forest rangers and so on, they would, for instance, tie them to a horse and let the horse gallop until the man was killed. So it was really quite atrocious. It wasn't peaceful at all. Whether you had Germans or Soviets, you still had other people who did not like Polish people.
So the Russians came in and sort of saved your dad, so what did they do
In a
with him
sense,
then?
they imprisoned him immediately in the town of Białowieża, and my mother had to take food to him every day.
Were you still living in your house, your same
We were
house?
still in our house. We were still in our house, and she would bicycle through the national park, which was not really very pleasant, especially coming in the evening. Well, you know, you had wild animals in the park. But in a sense, he was safe from the peasants. And then all of us, the entire family, was moved to the city of Druskienniki, which is now in Lithuania. Remember, Lithuania was part of Poland. Lithuania became part of Poland in 14th century, and that's when Lithuania was baptized, became Christian and Catholic. Anyway, this town of Druskienniki, Druskienniki, was a major resort, and this is where they placed practically all of the park managers, rangers, and so on, whoever survived. And from there, we were taken in February 1941 into Soviet Union. So what happened is we had to pack whatever we could, take it with us, and again, we had to leave. And of course, everything was left behind. Now, in the meantime, as the Soviets entered the city of Lvov, where my grandparents lived, my paternal grandfather was immediately imprisoned by them. His son, my uncle, was also imprisoned. He had a degree in history. He was a high school teacher, and they died in the prison. His mother, my grandmother, together with her daughter, an aunt of mine, and two cousins, they were deported, and another aunt deported to Soviet Union, where actually one of the cousins died and remained. The aunt came back with one child, and she hasn't been normal. She died, but she was completely abnormal. She had the paranoia, persecution complex. In Poland, this was absolutely normal. People who went through World War II were reliving all the time, all the experiences.
What are your first memories
My first memory?
of this, what was going on about that time? Because
Oh.
I know you were quite young, but...
Well, there are many memories, such as, a Soviet soldier trying to kill our dog. The dog was actually he was a hunting dog and very upset because my father was not there. He was one person's dog. He tried to jump on him, and he was going to shoot him in front of us children. Then I remember also when we were in Druskienniki, and then when the, of course you call it KBG today, but it was called NKVD, NKVD,
Right.
came in the middle of the night and took us to Soviet Union. So I remember very well, I was being awakened and I was being dressed by the maid. She put on all the warm things on me, to make sure, because it was about minus 40 centigrade, that kind of a winter. So I don't know how much it is in Fahrenheit, minus 40 centigrade.
Well, it's about zero, I think. Pretty
No,
close.
it's lower than
Even
zero,
lower than zero,
much
yeah.
lower
It's
than
5,
zero.
10 below or something.
Because centigrade 0 is what?
32?
32, but minus 40 would be much
Yeah.
more. At any rate, we were put in cattle trains, not passenger trains. These were taken immediately into Soviet Union. They put us in cattle trains, 40 individuals to a train.
The old 40 and 8s, they used to call them in World War I. Either 40 people or 8 horses it would carry.
Yeah. And so there was nothing. There was no water, there was no toilet, there was no medicine, nothing, absolutely, you know. And whenever we traveled through the countryside, if the train made a stop, my mother tried to get off and get some water, something, you know, because not food, she couldn't get the food, but at
Now
least
your
water.
father is still, is he?
He's still with us.
Oh, he's with you now.
He's with us. The Soviets, so to speak, saved him, and then, of course, they deported all of us, including my mother's mother, who was visiting us at the beginning of World War I and decided to remain with us and not go back to the city of Lviv. So she was with us. So we ended up in Ural Mountains. Not Siberia, but Ural Mountains. Some people were sent to Siberia, some people were sent to Ural Mountains. And in Ural Mountains, we actually were given a room in some peasant's house, cottage, whatever, just one room for the entire family.
The reason that the Soviets were deporting everybody is that they wanted slave labor, or they didn't want them to have to bother with them in Poland, or what?
No, they were eliminating Polish intelligentsia, same as the Nazis. Yeah.
So they didn't necessarily send everybody, it was just anybody with education or something like that?
Well, also, you know, anybody with military background. My father
Wow.
was in the reserve too. So they were doing that. But eliminating Polish intelligentsia, as many people as they could possibly kill, they were doing that by being so kind to us. Well, during the trip, where it was so cold, I became sick and I had actually pneumonia, which was diagnosed by a friend of ours who was, before he became an engineer, had a degree in engineering. He was a medical student and he diagnosed me. So what did they do with me? They put those glasses, I don't know if you're aware of the glasses that they put on people who had pneumonia.
I know.
In Russia, in Poland, in the good old days. Well, we had no medication, no antibiotics. And they didn't have any, of course, alcohol, because you should actually wipe the glass with alcohol, put some heat into it, and then put the glass over the body. And they used petrol, and it caught fire on me.
Oh.
But I survived. I survived, and I got well eventually. This was yet the time when Russia was not, or Soviet Union was not invaded by the Nazis. So we were sent to a kindergarten, Soviet kindergarten. And the reason why my mama sent us there, because at least we were given one meal a day. Not a very good meal, but it was a meal. But when the Nazis invaded Russia in 1941, there was no reason to go to school because there was no meal at all. And we were given a daily ration of about 100 grams of bread a day per person. And we were supposed to survive on that. So what my mother did, because she was allowed to take many of her things and possessions, she would trade her clothing, evening gowns and so on, for food. She was able to trade it for a she-goat, and so we had milk. And she was able to get some potatoes, which she planted then, and we had potatoes. And so more or less we managed to survive. But not very well.
Now you were living in a village or what?
In a village.
With
in a
other
village.
Polish people?
With other Polish people. But if you wanted to have additional food, you had to go a great distance to different places, different areas. Sometimes you would walk 50 kilometers or more to get to a place where you could maybe trade something for some food.
Did your parents speak other languages than Polish?
Yeah, my father did. That was the reason why he was actually imprisoned by the Soviets, because he was speaking to a friend of his in German. And so he was immediately labeled as a German spy and put in prison, and we have never seen him from that time on.
Okay, so this is in Russia?
In Russia.
Oh, okay, so we haven't quite got to that point yet.
Well, we're in Russia all the time.
I know, but so I didn't realize that, well, okay. Yeah, follow up on that a little bit more then. How long had you been in Russia before that happened?
Not terribly long. He was put into a labor camp to cut trees. And so I have no idea why he had to speak to his friend of his in German.
No, this is your father.
My father. But he did it. And it wasn't a political discussion, anything of that nature, but immediately, speaking German, he would
Because
have
this
been a
was
spy.
after the Nazis had invaded Russia. I mean, the Germans had.
I'm trying to think, maybe even before, but
But-
Russians wouldn't trust anybody. So he was put immediately in prison. And again, my mother had to go to the prison to see him, bring him clothing, fresh clothing, clean, bring him food, whatever was available. And last time she saw him, he was very sick and he was all swollen, so he probably died because we haven't been able to locate him, find him after the war. Now, when the Nazis invaded Soviet Union in 1941, and when General Sikorsky spoke to the Soviet officials, we were given the amnesty pardon because we were political prisoners. And my mother took us all, my sister, my grandmother, and myself. She gave a peasant some potatoes, not too many, but some. There was no food, so even if you gave him 5 or 10 potatoes, that was quite a bit. He took us to a railroad station, and we were able to take a train to Kazakhstan to get out of Ural Mountains. Because in Kazakhstan,
Now, where is that? Where is
in the south, Soviet Union south, that's where General Anders was forming Polish army. Władysław Anders, Anders, because General Sikorsky died in a crash. His plane took off from Gibraltar, and he and his daughter were killed. The pilots were saved. But anyway, so we arrived in Kazakhstan, and again we were put into some village, which was even much worse than what we had in Ural Mountains, because there the huts were made out of mud, adobe bricks, and we had to sleep on the floor just on straw, below which there was water. So the living conditions were terrible. There was no clean water. You would go to whatever was available, whatever water you could find, and take it, and of course try to boil it. And my sister came down with a terrible case of dysentery. Again, how she was saved, I have no idea. But when General Anders was actually forming his army, my mother and a friend of hers from the same village where we were went to a town to look for food, because there was no food, absolutely nothing. We were not given anything to eat at all. And so we children would go into the fields and try to find at least some roots to eat. So she was in town with this friend, and they came upon a Polish officer who had a truck, and he was looking for military families. And when he found out where we were, he brought my mother and her friend to our area, and we were immediately put on the truck and taken out, which was really how we were saved. Otherwise, we would have been left behind.
Do you remember, were you sad about your father not being with you, or did you know
No,
that perhaps he was-
life was so hard, so extremely difficult, that I actually did not understand it. The only time I understood what was going on is when the KBG, the officials, or in NKVD, came to get my mother to put her in a labor camp. And my grandmother sent me with a small pillow, and I was running through the village crying out, "Mama, Mama, Mama." And that I remember distinctly. But the other things, I remember also when I was sick with pneumonia. I had a terrible headache, and just extremely sick. Well, you know how sick you get. And I remember certain things. I remember going out into the forest in the Ural Mountains, looking for something edible to eat. I remember in Kazakhstan going out into the field and trying to locate roots and all the snakes around us. It was really a very difficult life, very difficult. So the memories are not happy memories.
Okay, so when they came and took you out of that village, then what happened?
Then we came to a port on Caspian Sea, and I don't remember the name of the port, but it should be in one of the publications I have with me, because from that port we were able to board a ship which was Soviet, Zdanov, Zhdanow, and this ship took us to what used to be Pahlavi, in a port on the Caspian Sea, and that was where we landed in Persia. So there were actually 2 transports on the ship. Not too many people came out of Soviet Union, about 150,000 of all of us.
Now, why did the Soviets give you amnesty? Was it their idea, or was pressure from the West, or what?
No, that was not pressure from the West. General Sikorsky, actually, before he died, he came and he arranged it, because by that time the Germans attacked Soviet Union. Poland was going to form an army to fight the Germans, and so the Soviets decided, well, this would help us. So this is what happened. I don't know, where are we now?
Okay, we're on the Caspian Sea. You got getting on a Soviet ship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where did you go?
To Pahlavi.
Oh, okay.
To Persia.
Spell that for me.
Pahlawi. The Pahlavi dynasty, remember? The Shah of Iran?
Oh, yes. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
But so the name has been changed. I don't know what it is now.
So how long did you stay there then?
We arrived, my goodness,
Is this with your mother and your sister?
my mother and sister and my grandmother.
And your
too.
grandmother?
Yeah. I did not get ready for this. Sorry.
You're doing awfully well.
Wonderful.
Okay, in June 1941, Hitler attacked Soviet Union, and General Sikorsky, he made a pact with the Soviets on July 30th, 1941. So we were able to come to Kazakhstan at that point, because we were given our amnesty, so we could move. And we were able to leave Kazakhstan in April and August 1942. So we arrived actually in April into Pahlavi. And then we were moved to Tehran, where there was a big Polish camp, all the Polish refugees coming out of Soviet Union. And there was a terrible, terrible epidemic of typhoid. And my grandmother, she was not that old, she was over 60, but you know, with malnutrition and so on, she contracted typhoid pneumonia and she died. She was buried in a mass grave, and I'm sure the mass grave no longer exists. We went to the cemetery to locate where she was buried. We were not able to do it. But anyway, and then my mother was left with 2 children. My sister had pernicious anemia. And I was also not very well. We were going through all sorts of childhood illnesses, diseases. And the children who were coming out of Soviet Union very often had no parents, orphans. The orphans were brought out, as many as possible. So an orphanage was formed in the city of Isfahan, Isfahan. And my mother decided to work in the orphanage, or else she would have gone insane with all the problems and things that happened. So we ended up in Isfahan, in the orphanage, first of all, with the director of the orphanage decided to separate the children from mothers. Whoever had a mother, as my sister and I, we could not stay with her. We were put with the French sisters, and I immediately contacted a cold, flu, from the flu, mumps, from mumps, double pneumonia. So I was placed in the Armenian hospital, and that was before the antibiotics. And the Armenian doctor, every other day, he would put the glasses on me, and then every other day, one day glasses, and one day some kind of herbal compost or whatever. And he actually got me well, believe it or not. I stayed in the hospital over a month. And my mother had to come every day and bring food for us. There was also a lady in the same room. She had a son who was very sick. He did not survive.
Did you all have enough food in that when you were living over there?
Yeah, we had enough food, but we were not...
Was it Polish food, or did you have to eat the native?
No, we were able to... Each orphanage was able to buy whatever on the market and prepare it whichever way. So I imagine it would have been Polish food. I'm not really sure. I don't remember. All I remember is that I could run through the park. Each orphanage was actually, there were several orphanages, and they were in palaces of Persian nobility. And so each one had a huge garden, and we were able to run through the gardens. School was organized. We were taught finally something, and life seemed to be very good.
And were they run by the Catholic orders, or
No.
Or it was by the
Polish
state?
organization,
Polish.
which was dependent upon Polish government in London, because the Polish government which escaped ended up in London and was functioning from there. So this is what happened.
Did you get to know many Iranians?
No, actually we did not. We were more or less isolated, and of course we did not speak the language. The school was conducted in the Polish language, and we did not stay that long because in 1943 the orphanage, or the group with which my mother was connected, was actually sent to Mexico. Again, General Sikorski, before he died, he went to Mexico, and with the Mexican president Avila Camacho, he arranged for a group of Polish people, not too many, to be sent to Mexico. And we departed from Karachi, and what used to be India, Karachi now is Pakistan, through the Pacific Ocean, stopping in Melbourne and so on, picking up some nationalist Chinese army and the Pacific, and we ended up in Los Angeles.
And what was the name of that ship?
Oh, it was United States, where is it? I even have a photograph of it in this book. USS Hermitage. It was previously a luxury passenger ship, Italian, which was taken by the American Navy and converted into a transport ship. It was very, very large.
That was a long trip at sea.
Very, very long. But I had a very good time.
I was going to say, after what you'd been through, it was probably very nice.
It was very nice, and one of the problems I had is that I could not eat very well because my stomach has shrunk terribly. And so the children would go into the dining room with my mother, and they would all finish, and I would barely eat 1/3 of the food, and one sailor every day stayed with me until I finished. It would take at least an hour, maybe 2 hours. But he really devoted himself to me. And another sailor, whenever he was off duty, he would come, and I forget what time it was, sometime in the afternoon. And we children already waited for him at the bottom of the stairs, which were divided right and left. As you know, in the United States, you walk up on the right, you descend on the left. And so he was at the top of the stairs. and we would ascend on the left and descend on the right, and he would scream and shout and run after us, and it was the most beautiful game we had in our lives. He was having a good time too, you know.
How old were you at this point?
In 43, I was about 7 or 8, something like that.
5, probably. You're born
No,
in
no, no, I was born 35. So it would have been about 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
1935? Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you were 7 then,
Yeah. So, you know,
Okay, yeah.
the freedom of it all. Oh, I'm not a very good subject. I keep on moving.
No, you're fine. That's fine. So you stopped in Melbourne, was one of the places that you
One
said?
of the places, I forget that where we picked up the Chinese Nationalist Army. We stopped in Melbourne, then we stopped at one of the American possessions, the islands, I forget which one. It was a very long trip, and of course we had Japanese submarines too to contend with.
Were you by yourself, or was it in a convoy? Were there other ships around?
No, as far as I recall, we were by, I don't really know if it was a convoy, but I don't remember. I know we had planes on top of the ship, we had an army and so on, but it was quite risky.
Yes. Did you get seasick at all?
No, on Caspian Sea everybody was sick, because Caspian Sea is very tumultuous. But on the Pacific, I don't remember, perhaps, but I don't recall. I had a glorious time.
And so you docked in Los Angeles, did you say?
In Los Angeles, and we were taken to Santa Ana, put in barracks there, and from there, on the train, we were taken to Mexico, to Colonia Santa Rosa.
Where's that?
That is in the state of Guanajuato, close to the city of Leon, Leon, Guanajuato, in Mexico.
How far from Mexico City would that be, more or less?
That would
Or
have
what
been
direction?
Guanajuato, state of Guanajuato. I'm trying to remember how many hours. Oh, probably driving 6-7 hours.
And did your mother speak English or Spanish?
No. We were put in a Polish camp, again with Polish teachers, Polish school and so on. We were never exposed to anything in Mexico. It was a very, really not a clever idea. Everybody was always talking about going back to Poland, when Poland is going to be free. We're going to resume our lives, and next Christmas we're spending in Poland, and nobody thought in terms of we have to start making a life here. So it was very patriotic, very emotional. However, it was not very practical. Because after the end of World War II, when Poland was put into the Soviet domain, despite the fact that the Polish army was fighting for our freedom. That's when the officials from American Embassy came to Colonia Santa Rosa and took our names, put it on a special list so we could come into the United States without waiting for, immigration quota or something. We came in as either political asylum or refugees, whichever, Same thing as was done with certain Cubans and Vietnamese.
And when did you come to the United States then?
Well, in 45, or I forget now, when Colonia Santa Rosa was closed, I forget exactly, we were in Mexico City. I attended Mexican schools, and in 1950 I came to the United States.
So you spent about 5 years or more, and about 7 years, I guess, in Mexico?
7 years. 7 years.
So did you finally
Well, I attended
learn
Mexican
Spanish
Mexican
and all
school,
that?
so I had to learn Spanish.
And that was
right.
in Mexico City?
Yes.
And you said your your sister lives in Mexico City now?
She's married. She lives in Mexico
So
City.
did she stay there the whole time then? Is that why did she marry a Mexican person? And
She was actually her first marriage was to an American. And then she married a Mexican. And she decided she wanted to remain in Mexico.
But she lived in Mexico all her life?
All her life.
Okay.
She had actually American citizenship, but then she decided to give it up in favor of Mexican citizenship. Don't ask me. It's I cannot explain. Her children, however, have dual citizenship, Mexican and American.
Okay. So when you came to the United States, where did you come to?
I came to Fort Worth, Texas,
And you were about 14?
about 14, 15, something like that, and I was placed immediately into American schools.
Okay. And how did that come about? How did you end up in Fort
Oh,
Worth?
because my father's sister, the youngest, she escaped from a Soviet Union, and she ended up in Tehran, where she actually married an American colonel. And he came to United States with her, naturally, their child, and she decided to bring me first for 1 year, and then the next year she brought my mother. My sister by that time was married and stayed.
How did she manage to escape?
She was given some rings by her mother and sister, so she was able to actually bribe the officials. And she joined the refugees coming out of Soviet Union. That's how she managed.
So how did you like Fort Worth?
Well, it was a cultural shock because here I came to United States. I was put into a Catholic school, Our Lady of Victory. I didn't speak a word of English, so I had to learn everything by heart, which was not really a big problem. But you know, after I have spent my earliest days in Polish community and then in Mexico City, which I loved, I had a very good time in Mexico City. Here I am in United States, and it's a little difficult. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more of then your stay in Mexico City. Did you have a lot of Mexican friends?
Oh yes, especially towards the end. We were befriended by a Mexican family. She had teenagers about our age, and every Sunday she would pack us, all of us, and we would go to some place, something or other. Oh no, it was fun. Mexico was fun.
And do you remember where you lived, the street you lived on?
Oh
the
yes,
house
I
you lived
remember.
in?
We lived on Calle Oslo, in what is today Zona Rosa.
Is that a suburb of Mexico City?
No, that is Mexico City. That is just 1 block from Paseo de la Reforma and 1 block from Niza. I don't know if you know Mexico City.
I've not been there, but...
Yeah, that used to be a glorious place, extremely elegant. Now, of course, it's very commercial.
And how did your mother work? How did you survive? Where did the money come from?
She worked. She worked for an individual Polish man. He was actually a Polish Jew, and he was producing furs. I don't know how good he was, but everybody had to survive. And my mama, of course, she had no idea at all about this work, but he took her in. He taught her everything, and so she worked for him and was able to manage to pay for us, you know, provide food and rental and such. And then when she came to United States, we moved to Los Angeles, and she started working in the garment industry until she came upon a Polish woman who was a designer. And she told my mother, I'm going to teach you how to sew. And my mother was taught by her how to sew, so she was able to work then. Instead of working just in the garment industry, which is very hectic, very strenuous, she was able to work with the designers because she knew how to work on designed clothing, specialties and such. So this is what happened.
Let's go back to Mexico City. What did you and your girlfriends do for fun when you were living
Oh,
there?
we would go to the movies, we would go some place where there was a swimming pool to swim all day, we would go into a forest hiking, not alone, but a whole group. And of course, schools had also excursions. We would go on the excursions with schools. No, we were busy.
Did you go? Did you go to Catholic schools there, or
No,
were they
no.
were state schools?
No, you actually did not have to speak of Catholic schools at that point in Mexico. Private schools, or I went to private schools, not state schools.
But did you have a parish that you went to church?
You did not have to belong to a parish as you do here. You simply went to church because practically all of Mexico is Catholic. So you simply went to church.
And was the Mass much different than you remembered it in Poland?
No, it's same Latin Mass. This was before Vatican II. So
yes.
it was Latin Mass. No, there was no difference at all. And I had an excellent educator in Colonia Santa Rosa, a Father Jarzymbowski, who was a Marian priest. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that Marian priests were great educators in Poland. You have them at Stockbridge, Massachusetts, here in the United States. And so he was an educator, and he escaped Poland because the Nazis were after him. The Nazis, as you recall, were killing many, many Polish priests. And he escaped. He made it through Soviet Union, through Japan, he made it to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. When he found out we were in Mexico, he came to work with us children. And so the education, religious education that I received was from him.
I have a classmate from grade school, actually, that became a Marianist priest, and he went a few...
These are not Marianists. Marians.
The Marians.
Marians.
You're right. But anyway, he went to Vladivostok and started a community there about 15 years ago, I think.
Well, Marians are all over the world. They are in Brazil, and of course Polish priests are in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, you name it.
Right.
They are. In fact, when I was now in Alaska, I was told in the Diocese of Fairbanks that they have 3 Polish priests. Yeah.
So when did you end up go to Los Angeles? How long did you stay in Fort Worth then?
Just 1 year. Just 1 year, and then he was called to Korea, war in Korea at that point. So my aunt moved to California. She was in Banning, and my mama came by then, and I was reunited with my mama, and so we lived in Los Angeles.
Do you remember, where did you live in Los Angeles?
In Highland Park.
Do you remember the house you lived in, or the street you lived in?
Yes, 58th Street or something like that, and I attended Benjamin Franklin High School, from which I graduated, and then I went directly to UCLA.
Okay, and what was your major in college?
I was fine arts major for my bachelor's, and then I decided to go back to graduate school. And in graduate school, I decided to become an art history major. So first I got my master's because I was told by all the professors, before you get your doctorate, you better have a master's so you can get a teaching position. So, and then I worked, of course, on my doctorate.
And when you got did you work at all while you were going to school, or were you just...
Oh yes, well I worked, and of course I had scholarships and fellowships and grants and such all the way, including my undergraduate education. I had scholarship, but as graduate I always had some grants, something. But still, I needed extra money. It was never enough. The grants were minimal, really. So you did what you did, and at one point I had to be a teaching assistant, which I didn't want to do, but graduate school is graduate school.
What schools?
UCLA.
UCLA?
UCLA.
Let's take a break. I'm just about out of tape here. I'm going to change my tape here now.